This evening, we have our Vice Chair, Robert Moore, speaking to us about 1947 to 1959, the era of the flying discs. Robert Moore began active engagement in ufology in the early 1980s and has followed the twists and turns of the subject since then. Sometimes as an active participant, other times like a Forrest Gump type observer. Oh, I love that. He was among one of the first wave of Bufora AIs and a signatory to the Code of Practice. He left ufology in 1999, studying archaeology and graduating with a BA degree in 2007 during that time. He returned to the subject in 2010, diversifying into apparition research. He joined ASSAP in 2012 and now serves as vice chairman. He has recently written a study of the Loxley Woods Somerset Highwayman apparition in 2021, and his other interests include archaeology, history, not the same thing, he's quick to point out, wargaming and role-playing games, both as a designer and player. He currently works as an administrative assistant in the worker accommodation industry. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know what to do. You put all your questions at the bottom and we will quiz Robert at the end of what will be an excellent talk, I know already. Put your questions in the chat at the bottom. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Robert Moore.
Oh, right. Hello, everybody. I can't see you now. You just got my PowerPoint on, so hopefully I'm looking at you in the face and all everything. Right, okay. This talk is entitled Flying Saucers over Britain, covering the period 1947 to 1960. Right, so how do we begin? The flying disc controversy was accepted by the sighting of 9 gleaming objects over the Cascade Mountains, Washington State, USA, and on the afternoon of June 24th, 1947. The objects were described as moving like a disc if you skipped it across the water. Thus, an astronomer that some 10 years later would be known as UFOs, and as increasingly today, UAPs. While the British media industry reported this event and the later claim of a crashed flying disc at Roswell, New Mexico as solely American wonders, the United Kingdom would very soon be very host to indigenous sighting claims of its own. As such, the speaker considers 1947 to 1960 the flying saucer era, the flying disc era, the foundation epoch of the UFO mystery in Britain and elsewhere. The subject at that time was a conceptual blank slate. The cultural and official attitudes been instigated in the wake of sightings and popular interest. The conception of UFOs as they manifested in the UK was and continues to be significantly influenced by well-publicised incidents from the United States, propagated both by the global media and English imprints of American books on the subject. The term used to define them, flying saucers, was inspired by a description by Kenneth Arnold of his seminal observation on the 24th of June 1947 of mysterious flying wing type objects over the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. He described their motions as being akin to a saucer skipping across water. This was widely misinterpreted as defining their appearance and was the basis of the term flying saucer, subsequently popularized by the US press. The first British flying disc reports noted by the media were relatively unspectacular, but feature one notable anomaly, a series of incidents predating Kenneth Arnold's observation, which I'll discuss in a minute. While not the focus of this talk, it is relevant to note the political state of the UK and the world in general at this time. Right, the UK had been reduced in status by the consequences of World War II and gradually lost its empire during this period, subsequently being replaced by a Commonwealth. The Second Elizabethan Age began with the ascension of Elizabeth II in February 1952. In the UK, rationing for most items introduced during World War II continued in 1954. The skies of German bombing were also still evident in many British cities. Due to its victory in the Battle of Britain, 1940-1941, the RAF was revered and highly respected. World War II was a recent memory, with many adults having served in the Army, Navy, or Air Force during that conflict. Due to its victory in the Battle of Britain, the RAF, as I said, was highly revered and respected. The US and Russia were now the main global superpowers. A Cold War commences commences between Russia and the rest from 1948 onwards. There is notable fear regarding the motives of Russia and espionage activity, both in the UK and USA. Everyone was under the shadow of nuclear weapons, the destruction of humanity being seen as a real possibility. The US had a monopoly on nuclear weapons until 1949, to August 1949, when the Russians, mostly through illicit means, acquired and demonstrated their possession of this technology. Thereafter, there was a fear of guided rockets being used as weapons against the West. Space travel was in its infancy, various attempts by the Russians and Americans to be the first in space. Some considered it fanciful, some considered this kind of technology fanciful, others an inevitable consequence of progress. However, that said, the first satellite, Sputnik 1, was eventually launched in October 1957 by Russia. Space exploration all used rockets based on those either developed by the Nazis in World War II or on the same ICBMs that threatened the world's survival. Some of these themes are subsequently echoed by the case studies presented here. So, with no further ado, let us see what was happening in Britain regarding these flying discs. Right, from the 16th to the 23rd of January 1947, a series of anomalous radar contacts were detected over the North Sea. These targets, nicknamed Charlie, were noted as moving at high altitude and or erratically, along with sudden changes of speeds and rates of climb. Interception aircraft, mostly Mosquitoes and Gloucester meteors, were vectored into these targets, but nothing was ever observed. Weather balloons, anomalous propagation, false radar contacts, and a new type of Soviet aircraft employing captured Nazi tenant were all being offered as explanation. But an analysis of surviving data cast out all these explanations. It should be noted that the Charlie events occurred 6 months before the inception of the modern UFO mythos, flying saucer mythos, of course. At 05:15 hours BST on the 13th of June 1947 at Sandwich, Kent, Mrs. Marjorie Hyde, the wife of the then rector of St. Andrew's Dill Church, observed a sharply defined form, more of a ring than a saucer, while she waited for a railway level crossing gates to open. This dark grey sign as a possibly rotating ring, not filled in like a saucer as she describes it, was only observed for a few seconds, moving left to right of the observer, not too up, she says, not too high up, inland from the direction of the sea. The witness stated she was reticent to discuss this sighting, but was encouraged to say something due to the heavy flying saucer press coverage at the time. This was basically to do with the Roswell incident. Mrs. Hyde's observation is relayed by numerous British newspapers during early 1947, as I said, in relation to accounts of the Roswell incident. But however, virtually the same day it was carried, virtually on the next day it was carried, the British press published stories stating the Roswell saucer was actually a weather balloon used to record high altitude winds. As a result, the Roswell incident was dismissed from public consciousness for several decades until it attracted renewed interest in the 1980s and beyond. As for the Sandwich observation, the possibility that the object was actually a smoke ring cannot be ignored, especially it happened on a level crossing in an era where steam trains were in common use. Marjorie Hyde, however, was adamant this was not the case. What I'll do, I'll go through all the slides I've done before in case you've missed it. Right, that was the second slide about Kenneth Arnold. Everybody see that all right?
We can indeed. Yeah, that's Kenneth Arnold, yeah?
Yes, that was the Kenneth Arnold and Roswell things I was talking about.
Perfect.
That's the historical context one. I've read that already. That was the Operation Charlie. And now we're on to the next one, Fireballs and Meteors.
Right, perfect. We're up to date. Thank you, Robert.
Right, I have to do it like that from now on then. On the 23rd of November 1947, at 06:32 hours, a number of observers saw a bright red soundless cone-shaped object producing a long trail of sparks over Prescott, Northern England. It appeared to be flying very fast at near rooftop height along a straight course, originating from the east and heading west towards Liverpool. One observer said it went out after it seemed to fall a short distance. The recounted aspect of the rocket, inverted commas, which was observed over a wide area emitting a trail of sparks, followed by a sudden disappearance, is consistent with it being a perceptional bolide meteor. A red ball several times larger than a star with a fiery tail like a V1. Notice, of course, all the references to missiles and rockets, as I said previously, and with the historical context of it. So obviously people are concerned about guided rockets and things, and that's why they're looking up at the sky and seeing these kind of interpreting natural things as that kind of object. Right, okay, was seen throughout Kent at 04:30 hours on the 24th of March 1948. It was visible for a repeated 63 seconds, travelling in a southeasterly direction towards the channel, and in some case counts left a streak behind, as like a trail, I suppose. One account claims that this event was instigated by a meteorite that crashed into a back garden at Minster in that region. What else have I got? Anything else? No, I'm still on that one. At Ramsey, Isle of Wight, 6 engineering workers were having a work break just outside the open doors of their factory at 10:05 hours on the 20th of October 1950, when they espied a strange aerial object through a break between the clouds. This was described as resembling a long, narrow oblong with rounded ends, with each end being dark, where the centre repeated almost transparent. The media reported that no RAF or civil aircraft was over Romsey at the time. While of interest due to it being among Britain's earliest alleged flying disc observations, indeed, the press report counting it carries the headline, "Now Flying Saucers over Britain," it is likely to have been one of the many high-altitude research or espionage balloons in use at that time. These events seem to have quickly faded from public consciousness and triggered no official response. They are akin to the majority of media accounts of aerial anomalies, detailing events of that time, of course, events of low strangeness and of likely prosaic origin. Sorry. Unlike America, British things occurring from 1947 through to the early 1950s are generally not well documented, mostly in the form of newspaper and magazine accounts. Until recently, few incidents from prior to 1950 were noted by researchers, but only with the advent of internet newspaper archive sites are they now becoming rediscovered. The concept of flying discs was transmitted during the 1950s by several works, mostly but not exclusively from the US, or at least being American influenced. The first was Frank Scully's book, Behind the Flying Saucers, which detailed the supposed recovery of a series of crashed flying saucers around the Aztec, New Mexico region. These were said to have been crewed by little men, supposedly from Venus, but some years later, following the publication, it was exposed as a hoax. This was followed by another book from Britain this time on the subject. This was called The Riddle of the Flying Saucers, as another Wood Watson by Gerald Hurd. This was published also in 1950 by Carroll and Nicholson of London. Hurd's work cited pre-1940s aerial observations along with contemporary American sightings and official studies. It is notable for postulating flying saucers were piloted by intelligent insects from Mars, visiting Earth due to concerns over mankind's development over nuclear weapons. While Hurd's work was subsequently reprinted several times during the 1950s, it doesn't seem to have many notable or lasting impact. Although Hurd's Martian insect theory is echoed by Nigel Kale's Quatermass and the Pit, a TV series broadcast in 1958, 1959, and subsequently filmed by Hammer in 1967. I'm going to drink water a minute. More influential were the works of pulp writer Donald Keyhoe and also with Desmond Leslie and J.H. Adamski. Keyhoe's first work on the subject, Flying Saucers Are Real, was published in 1950. This and his subsequent books described in a dramatized narrative format the first significant American sightings and the concept of an insider cover-up, instigated by what he termed the Silence Group. The contacted claim of Adamski, who premiered in an English published book co-written by the Anglo-Irish author Desmond Leslie, termed Flying Saucers Have Landed, which was printed in 1953. The first section is by Leslie, detailing supposed pre-1947 events stretching back to biblical or classical times. The second section details Adamski's supposed meeting with a Venusian. This This book by Adamski and Blesi introduced the concept of an influential conception of a flying saucer, namely a elaborate dome disc with portholes and three spheres on its underside, along with the concept of contacti, a singular chosen mouthpiece for entities originating from planets within our solar system, most notably Venus and Mars. I will go to that one. There's a Adamski. There's this classical UFO shape, which is still influential today. England was soon to have its own book, the book Flying Saucer from Mars, printed in 1955, detailed the supposed contact experience of a Cedric Allingham, that chap on the telescope there, above there, in Scotland. It is now widely believed to be a hoax instigated by astronomer Patrick. As you can see here, that's a picture of Cedric Allingham on the left-hand side, and that's a picture of what was believed was Patrick Moore's telescope, and they are very similar. And then here we see the supposed flying saucer that landed in Scotland, and Allingham's supposed to have seen, and that's supposed to be one of the Martians that got out. Why little official interest was shown in these claims? This was to change due to a number of observations involving RAF personnel during the early 1950s. On the 1st of June 1950, at 14:30 hours, a meteor pilot landing at RAF Tangmere reported that while flying at 20,000 feet over the Portsmouth area, he observed a circular, fast-moving, bright metal object. It was sighted as travelling on an easterly course over 1,000 feet above the pilot on a reciprocal course at an estimated speed around 800 knots, approximately 920 miles per hour. The former was observed in excess of 15 seconds, the pilot observing it twice during his encounter. Inquiries were made to the nearby radar station at RAF Watling, who reported they had detected an unusual, seemingly fast-moving radar target just after its observation. This was, however, deemed to have had no connection with the meteor pilot's observation, the contact interpreted as interference from another radar transmitter. The flying saucer worker, who were mentioned later, assessed this report and concluded it was either an optical illusion or a meteorological balloon. Nonetheless, the Tangmere incident is considered to be the earliest detailed account of a flying saucer from a military source and the first to be officially evaluated by a British governmental agency. You've still seen all the slides all right?
Absolutely fine, Robert. Thank you.
Right, here we go again. RAF Farnborough, 11:27 hours on the 14th of August 1950. Flight Lieutenant Hubbard, an experienced pilot, heard a distant humming and observed a discus with a shimmering mother-of-pearl surface, producing bluish sparks of light. That's my sad interpretation of that. I couldn't find any picture of it anywhere, so I made one up myself. During the course of the event, the four moved closer to Hubbard and was seen to rock from side to side. There was perceiving an ozone-like smell when the film was overhead at low altitude. The discus was reported as being fast-moving and observed for around 30 seconds. Here's the big one. On 10:43 hours, 19th of September 1952, at RAF Topcliffe, Yorkshire, 10 RAF officers and aircrew were observing a Gloucester meteor jet flying east to west towards the Dishford Aerodrome, when a silver white circular object was seen 10,000, 20,000 and 5 miles astern. He was seen to descend in a pendulum-like manner, similar to a fallen sycamore leaf, swinging left to right. As the meteor began its landing approach, the object appeared to be following it, but then ceased descending and hovered, rotating on its axis. The foreman accelerated incredible speed to the rest, then turning southeast and disappearing from view, being visible for about, visible for about 15 to 20 seconds. This sighting occurred in the midst of a NATO exercise turned Operation Mainbrace. And on the 2nd of February 1959, Roy Mason, Labour MP for Barnsley, asked the Secretary of State for Air, George Ward, what was the result of the inquiry into the identified flying object sighted by airmen during the NATO exercise main base on the 19th of September? Ward replied, no object was identified. On the 21st of October, 1952, a Gloucester Meteor training flight took off from RAF Rissington, credited by Flight Lieutenant Michael Swinney and Lieutenant David Crofts. During their flight, they observed three stationary, perfectly circular, white shiny objects. They compared to parachutes that were said to be an estimated height of 12,000 feet. They left no condensation trail. After the aircraft climbed to approximately 30,000 feet, the object seemingly changed position, moving from left to right. During this period, the United Kingdom never conducted any long-term monitoring reports comparable in scope to America's Project Sign, Grudge, or Blue Book. Nonetheless, the two Farnborough observations combined with the RAF Tangmere incident comprised the three reports assessed by a government technical intelligence flying saucer working party active during 1950 and 1951. In 1952, then Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent a memo to the then existent Air Ministry asking, what does all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? They duly replied with a briefing memo on August 1952. This concluded, based on the principles of Occam's razor, as they stated, that the reports likely had a prosaic cause. This verdict was based on an earlier study by the Technical Intelligence Flying Saucer active during 1950-1951, which in turn was influenced by the negative findings of Project Grudge, the USAF's initial flying saucer study effort. The Air Ministry, as with the United States Air Force, worked on the assumption that virtually all UFO reports had rational solutions. In one interview, the Air Ministry stated it believed 85 to 90% could be easily ascribed to rational solutions. The remainder, they stated, were defined as unidentified insufficient information, reflecting the MOD's supposition that these instances would be explicable if more clearly observed and the circumstances of such sightings were better documented. Nonetheless, those reporting sightings to official bodies were asked 16 questions taken from a 1 or 2 page checklist based on this and other official discussions. The Air Ministry began to formally monitor sightings from 1953 onwards. Yearly statistics of reports were compiled that day. This is by call, and there's an example I show on the screen there. The Air Ministry, of course, was subsequently replaced by the Ministry of Defence in 1964, who continued to formally monitor UFO reports until 2009. The term UFO, an alphabet super acronym equating to unidentified flying object, while reportedly coined by Blue Book director Edward Ruppelt in 1950, didn't come into common use until 1957. This was likely popularized by the title of Ruppelt's book, The Report on Unidentified Objects, published in that year. Before then, they were defined as either flying discs or flying saucers, even when the sighted object wasn't disc-shaped. The common range of forms at this time were discs, resembling an inverted plate or two inverted plates placed rim to rim, with or without a dome on top, a sphere, a cigar, usually a horizontal tubular form with rounded ends, and star-like forms. An overview of UFO cases reported up to the mid-1950s, enacted by a ufologist called Dr. Graham Newstubb, defined the 1950s era of flying discs as follows. 76% of the phenomena were observed visually, 24% involved radar, 11% photographs, 6.5% optical instruments, 6% other sundry devices. According to visual observations, 52.5% of the objects sighted were discs, 14.1% were cylinders, 50% were spheres, and 8.2% are of miscellaneous shapes. In brackets, he says there, in 10.2% of cases, shape is not recorded. In colour, the objects fall into two main groups. 32% appear as bright metallic solid objects. 82% are solid luminous bodies of differing and various colours, where in 40% of cases, no colour was specified. At night, 78% of the objects are described as luminous and 22% are unspecified. The luminosity varies from a dull glow to a brilliant flaming radiance. A small but interesting class of observation amounting to less than 2% of the cases claim to have had a close view of an object at ground level. While the occasional claimed landing event was reported in the UK, accounts of UFO entities reports were rare and usually associated with contactee claims. In the UK, this would remain the case until about the 1970s, sorry. In Britain, national civilian saucer groups did not come into existence until 1953, this being in response to American cultural trends. The British Flying Saucer Bureau, as you can see from the picture, that's one of the first ones, based in Bristol, was initially founded as a branch of Albert Bender's American Flying Saucer Bureau and continued to exist in some form until the early 21st century. It published a journal of record, Flying Saucer News, into the late 1950s. One of Britain's oldest magazines on the topic, Flying Saucer View, was incepted in 1955. Smaller local flying saucer clubs were also incepted at this time. This included the Tunbridge Wells Flying Saucer Club, famous for hosting the only known lecture from alleged contactee Cedric Allingham, and who also counted among its members the former RAF Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding. Another was the Wigan Flying Saucer Group. This was founded in 1953 and had around 25 members, mostly university students, with David Reitman, editor of the magazine Uranus, acting as chairman. The limited resources and outreach of these early flying saucer groups resulted in numerous oversights, the monitoring reports being summarised mostly in a few sentences. We've already alluded to George Adamski, who was among the first so-called classic contactees, reporting alien congress in November 1952 with a tall, blonde-haired, androgynous being called Ortfon and his craft, supposedly from Venus. With his alleged involvement with flying saucers, Adamski repeatedly took numerous photographs. He observed even often repeatedly through his reflecting telescope. The most famous of this image featured the so-called Venetian scout ship, using numerous media representations up to the present day. This now iconic flying saucer depiction is represented as being around 12 meters in diameter, with a rounded top upper substructure with central portholes running along the center. Below was an undersection featuring a triangular arrangement of 3 hemispheres. Adamski was far from illiterate in regards to claiming a supposed Venusian origin for the flying discs, or at least that some had an arrangement of 3 spheres on their underside. Both of this had been alluded to in the Scully hoax claim of several years earlier. Claimed observations, dubious, potentially explicable, and sometimes seemingly anomalous, continued to be made throughout the 1950s. The following cases are merely a sample of the numerous accounts made during this time. Latimer Dan, Kensington, East Sussex, on Monday, 6th of October 1953, a member of the Royal Observer Corps was travelling from Wrentham to Kensington along the A12 on his motorcycle. At about 1845 hours, he became aware of an atmospheric vibration like a low-frequency hum, which he could both hear and feel. He looked up and saw 4 rays of light approaching him from towards the east. The beams cast a glow from around the form's outline. He immediately stopped his motorcycle to observe. As he did so, the form flew over him, travelling quite fast, following a rough northeast to southwest path, disappearing from view behind a place called Foxborough Wood. It reportedly resembled a discus, the light beams being emitted from a dome emitted on its upper section. He measured the sighting had a duration around several seconds, and the object appeared to be at a height of 200 feet. A relatively short distance away in Norwich, also on the 6th of October 1953, a business owner and long-time amateur astronomer observed, on leaving his house at 1915 hours, a strange yellow light in the southwestern sky. This light, when viewed through a 3-inch refracting telescope, was seemingly resolved into an elaborate form, as you can see from the picture there, a greyish bell-like body with a flattened dome on top, the dome possessing a series of portholes with rays of light streaming from it. This form was reportedly viewed for around 3.5 minutes, with several other observers also claiming observations. Both incidents occurred shortly after the publication of Flying Saucers Had Landed, Desmond Leslie giving a lecture on Adamski's book in the town on 20th of October 1954. On the 20th of May at Wincanton, Somerset, a man cycling home from a dance at 2 o'clock in the morning noticed an orange glow some distance away. Looking closer, he then repeatedly observed a 50-foot diameter bowl-shaped metallic object with a window dome on top, hovering a short distance from the ground. Shadows were seen to move inside, and a luminous orange sphere hovered a short distance from the dome. After about a minute, the dome lifted off, tilted and climbed away due northeast at great speed, making a slight swishing noise while doing so. The event was subsequently reported to the local police, and a 100-foot diameter circular grass depression slightly burned was reportedly found at the site in Locust, but no assessment of this was seemingly made. Here's the next one. Okay, sorry about that. At 16:45 hours, 23rd of October 1954, a housewife became aware of a sound like water being poured on a fire while at her home in Branton, Staffordshire. On looking up at the sky, she observed a sombrero-shaped object tilted at an angle with two entities looking out of a window. These resembled Adamski's Venusians, having long blonde hair and high foreheads. The entities reportedly wore transparent helmets and were clad in turquoise Swidas ski suits. We briefly looked down at the scene sternly, not in an unkind fashion, but almost sad and compassionately. Her two children were also present and hid under a table while this was going on. The witness reported a long history of psychic and paranormal events prior to and after this incident. This is an interesting one coming up now. One of mine, actually. At around 22 to 2300 hours on the 5th of December 1954, a housewife was putting her 4 children to bed in a Victorian-era terrace house in Newtown, Southampton. While doing so, she turned and instantly glanced at her bedroom window. With astonishment, she observed a brightly luminous hovering object compared to an old-fashioned spinning top or 2 saucers joined at the rim. Its angular size was estimated to be larger than the full moon. This spinning top then proceeded to change colour from green, merging with red, merging with silver right. It continued to hover and change colour for about 2 to 3 seconds before shooting off at colossal speed from a standing start in a northeasterly direction. It was observed for an estimated 12 seconds. This case was reported twice, both to Norman Toogood, a before investigator in 1964, and to myself in 1999. Toogood, in his investigation, discovered 4 other cases stated to have occurred on the 4th of January 1954. One occurred at Portland Bill and related to a fast-moving, brilliant silver object. Another was of a shining disc seen at Poole. Sighting also occurred at Selborne, related to a disc spinning on its axis, changing colour from silver to red. The last repeatedly occurred at Guildford, involving a rapidly moving reddish disc. Toogood believed all these events occurred along a 150 kilometre straight line in relation to each other. I have checked this supposition and, based on the information available, have found it to be at least superficially correct, as you can see from the drawing there. Unfortunately, the times when these initial events occurred were not noted, and accounts could not be located at the time of writing in 2023. Toogood's proposal is comparable to the concept of Aimé Michel's orthosony, popular in the 1950s and 1960s. The theory that UFO sightings repeatedly occur along long-established straight track routes. At Coniston Lake District at around 1100 hours on the 15th of February 1955, 2 children, Stephen Derbyshire and Adrian Mayer, repeatedly saw a strange silvery round object with a silvery glassy appearance. It was further described as a solid metal-like thing with the depth of a dome, with portholes and 3 humps or landing domes underneath. It was reportedly seen at low elevation, reporting moving behind a feature and coming back into view a few seconds later. It then reportedly tipped along its side and shot up into the air with a deep swishing sound. Derbyshire claimed to have taken several images of the UFO, or if you call it flying disc to be contemporary, which, why they came out blurred, had sufficient detail to make out its basic shape. An engineer called Leonard Cramp, on examining these images, concluded that the disc depicted in the Derbyshire images had the same configuration of George Dempsey's scout ship. Today, these pictures are now mostly forgotten or remembered as hoaxes, like other repeated UFO images of this era. Again, mostly taken by children. The images eventually stated they were hoaxes, but often later retract their confessions, leaving these and other photographs in conceptual limbo. Daytime on the 25th of May 1955, the crew of a London airport-bound Portuguese Skymaster aircraft observed a long, slim, rotating, wingless cigar-shaped object with a polished aluminium hue while flying 5,000 to 6,000 feet over Epsom and Dunsford. It was seen to pass 100 yards from them at terrific speed under the aircraft's nose. No smoke trail was observed. The cigar was only visible from the aircraft's flight deck, being observed by most of its crew. The Air Ministry subsequently concluded the cigar was merely a long toy balloon. No paperwork related to this case has ever been located in the National Archives. We believe it's likely destroyed as a consequence of then current eight-year rule. They only keep paperwork for 8 years after the occurrence. At Bexley Heath, Greater London, between 20:30 hours and 1 p.m. on the 17th of July 1955, there were numerous reputed observations of a circa 25-foot diameter bell-shaped UFO described as a greyish or beaten, having a greyish or beaten silver surface and underside with either suckers, free spheres, or lights underneath. It was stationary for a few minutes before shooting up rapidly into the sky. There are several accounts of this event, though they differ in regards to various salient details. Many of these accounts, however, were required retroactively decades after the event. It is also notable for occurring in a relatively populated area. Yes, yet more air-to-air radar events. At Laken Heath Bentwaters Air Force Base on the 30th of August 1956, 2 defense radar systems seemingly detect a high-altitude object traveling at 2,300 to 4,600 miles per hour, with contacts detected from 21:30 hours to 02:30 hours the next morning. Only a red light was seen by some ground observers, later identified as the planet Mars. Other radar contacts were made. In one instance, stationed with very fast-moving red light observed by 2 groups of observers, which some speculate were caused by the inactive Perseid meteor shower. Several Venom fighter jets were sent up and detected various contacts, both stationary and in motion, via their own in-flight interception radar systems. In one instance, an unseen contact was detected as suddenly orientating itself to the aircraft's rear. Weather conditions were potentially conducive to generating temperature inversions capable of inducing false radar contacts at that time. The Laken Heath Bentwaters case represents one of the most significant cases in British UFO history, or a prime example of how a combination of natural phenomena can create a very illusionary one. Right, at 1200 hours on the 4th of April 1957, 3 separate ground-based bombing range radar units, RAF REFs through to Scotland, detected what was interpreted as a large object as big as a battleship, along with 3 smaller objects located at 14 to 60,000 feet high and due northeast over the Irish Sea, around 20 to 25 miles away from those radar stations. These forms alternated between being stationary or moving northeast to east at a determined speed of 70 to 240 miles per hour. These radar contacts were detected for 36 minutes before vanishing. No visual sightings were associated with this event. At midnight on the 20th of May 1957, a ground radar station based at RAF Kelvedon Hatch detected an apparent aerial object exhibiting very unusual flight patterns located 32,000 feet east of Ipswich. Two one-seater F-86D Sabre fighter jets from the American 406 fighter bombing wing based at RAF Manston were scrambled to intercept it. Visibility was poor due to misty weather conditions. The jets were vectored towards the target. When around 12 miles away, they were requested to use an afterburner to intercept the contact. The plane subsequently accelerated to a speed of about Mach 0.92. At least one aircraft, towed by Lieutenant Milton Torres, caught out a strong radar signal directly ahead of their location. Ground control then ordered the pilots to fire all their 25 missiles at this contact. As the jet turned to engage both ground and airborne radar, both ground and airborne radar systems indicated the target was moving away at a credible speed, estimated to be in excess of 1,000 knots by the ground radar unit. A day after landing, Torres was debriefed by an official who told him not to discuss the incident. Why commentators have noted the order to fire on the UFO without provocation. Dr. David Clark speculates this may have been a secret exercise using a simulated radar track to test the abilities and inclination of NATO fighter pilots. One night in November 1957, possibly on the 31st day of that month, a mysterious object was said to have fallen from the sky and reputedly discovered by 3 men on Siflo Moor, Scarborough, Yorkshire. While this artifact vanished for a while, it was subsequently recovered by one of the originals following a newspaper appeal, along with a cash reward of £10. This 46-centimeter diameter disc-shaped construct weighed 16 kilograms and had a hieroglyphic description run along its lower section. When dissected, it was found to contain a copper tube, which contained 16 thin copper sheets adorned with additional hieroglyphic writing. The supposed translation of this text relayed a message from the disk's supposed extraterrestrial creators, describing how and why it had been dispatched to Earth. On examination, the object was found to be constructed from copper and lead, the composition of both being terrestrial in nature. Needless to say, this case is widely dismissed as a hoax today. It is claimed, if not officially documented, that the hoax responsible for constructing the saucer later confessed to their involvement in this affair. The disc seemed to have been disassembled, with portions sent to aviation historian and UFO enthusiast Charles Gibbs Smith in 1963. These were rediscovered in his donation archives curated by the Science Museum in 2018, representing the only known surviving fragments of this disc. So, how do we summarize the first epoch of what later became known as ufology in the United Kingdom? Why only a complete picture of these times remain, the following aspects seem significant. British sightings of flying discs occurred very shortly after the first American reports of June 1947. The vast majority of these early accounts were relatively unspectacular and likely explicable. Up to the 1950s, the majority related to forms seen at some distance with little in the way of associated exotic features. The early 1950s featured a number of sightings by RAF pilots, which are less easy to attribute to prosaic causes. Civilian accounts also seemed of increasing quality from about 1950 onwards. By 1950, flying saucer literature began to be published in Britain, albeit highly dependent on American sightings and official studies. Flying saucers were largely ignored by the Air Ministry until 1951, following a number of reports by RAF pilots. They quickly adopted the position of the US United States Air Force position that all sightings were potentially explicable, an approach they continued to follow to the end of their involvement with the subject in 2009. The first civilian UFO study groups, or flying disc groups, to use contemporary parlance, appeared from 1953 onwards. The first entity accounts, UFO entity accounts, were contactee claims. The main British example, Sarah Cameron, likely a hoax involving Patrick Moore. Later entity claims, again similar to those first appearing in the US would follow. George Adamski's claims were highly influential on at least a number of British sighting claims, with several observations of supposed Venetian-style scout ships being made in Britain, including at least one set of photographs. So this was the beginning of the UFO controversy in the United States and in the United Kingdom. From these simple routes, sightings and interest would only grew in complexity. Questions, please.
Robert, thank you so much. What a fascinating talk. I think I speak for all of us when we say, I mean, the comments and the questions have been coming in thick and fast.
Sorry, it was a bit long.
No, not at all. It's always
long and very technical. It's a portion of my book that I've written. This is the 7 areas of ufology, which I talked about in the lecture last year. This is what I was going to deliver, but it had to be cut down to about 30 minutes. So that alone was almost 50 minutes. That's only one area of ufology.
Well, as you say, it's a massively extensive subject anyway, and your passion for it just shone through, and it was lovely to hear from you and to hear your
as much facts and figures as I could. Also tried to find new stuff, instead of rehashing all the old things that people have talked about in books all the time.
Well, there's definitely lots of stuff,
especially about the origins of belief in Venusians and also the three spheres underneath UFOs. We actually traced that to Frank Scully's book, which nobody seemed to appreciate that until I found out.
It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. We really enjoyed it. I'm going to pass over to Christian, who's going to take some questions in a moment. I just wanted to ask you a couple while I'm on here, and then I'll pass on to Christian. What first got you fascinated in the field? Because
it's just all the stuff that was going on in the late 70s. Every day there was reports in the papers. Every day there was news at 10 talking about sightings in New Zealand and sightings in this and sightings in that, and details of UFO conferences in London. I wanted to be a part of it. I was too young. I was about 15, 16. That's why you might feel a bit weird. I'm involved then. I'm as young as I am, but look at most of most men now.